name's Stefan Evans, and I'm the CEO of the BEM Foundation. And we're really, really pleased that so many of you joined us today on what's quite a sunny, nice lunchtime at our home for me in Cardiff. Anyway, so for those of you who are not familiar with us, the BEM Foundation is it's a think tank working to find long-term solutions to poverty and inequality in Wales. And our work on access to justice is an area that's grown in importance for us over recent years, and is fundamental. We think if we are to create a Wales that is socially just. We're very pleased that the funding for this work that we're launching today has come from the Welsh Government, so we'd like to thank them for their funding to enable us to do this. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Isaac and Elle, who can tell you a little bit more about what exactly they've been looking at in this space around legal aid and the need for people to have access to justice around the migration system. So I should have checked which one was you going first. Is it you, Isaac?
It is me, yes. Thanks, Stefan. Hi, I'm Isata. I'm Bevan Foundation's Head of Policy for Migration. And the project that we're talking about today is funded by Welsh Government. It sits in a broader body of work on access to justice, which is funded by the Justice Together initiative. And in that broader body of work over the past 3 years, we have been researching and highlighting a decline in the immigration legal sector. And along with others across the UK, we've identified that the sector is in deep and lasting crisis. And it's a crisis that locks many people out of justice. For this project, we wanted to identify what could be done in the devolved context to protect the remaining legal services that we have here in Wales, and also to build on that base to revitalise and regenerate the sector. So we've developed a strategy for the next Welsh Government. And because of that, what we're talking about today will be very much focused on actions for Welsh Government. But that doesn't preclude the actions that others can take, and that includes the UK Government and various statutory bodies. This is the third output in our Developing the Immigration Advice Sector in Wales project, and the previous two outputs are available on the Bevan Foundation website. This report sets out the challenges that we've identified. It looks at how those challenges overlap and cut across the strategy goals. And we have formulated a strategy that addresses those challenges in what we believe is the most direct and effective way. In this presentation, we'll go through the key points in that strategy, but obviously we can't cover everything. And so we do urge you to download the report, which is available on our website today. We've taken a collaborative approach to the project. We've spoken to interested parties across Wales and also outside of Wales, and we're really grateful to everybody who's engaged with us. We will talk to more funders and regulators as we develop costed briefings, which will support the implementation of this strategy, and they are going to come out over the coming months. The project was overseen as well by an advisory group, and that comprises of people with learned experience and also people with lived experience. And that created a really robust sounding board to guide the project and also to provide feedback on the strategy as we went along. We had lived experience participation as well throughout the project at its heart, and we'd like to thank Amber Patterson for leading on that work. This slide really gives an overview of the overlapping goals and challenges, and please don't try to read it. We know that the writing's really small. Elle will take you through each of those goals in detail in a moment, but we wanted to show the overview of the whole thing and to see how those different goals overlap on each other and impact on each other. As we were doing the research, 4 main goals emerged, and this is what we've built our strategy around. The first was to build sector resilience, which is at an all-time low. The second is to train new advisors and grow capacity, and the sector really has a problem at the moment with capacity for development of new advisors, which is stunting sector growth. The third is to empower clients, which we believe is essential to improving quality and tackling some of that very high levels of exploitation that people are facing. And finally, our final goal was to improve quality. It's a very complex area of work, as you can see, and there are a lot of overlapping and interlocking challenges. And the solutions as well often impact on one another. So identifying the strategy was quite a complex process, but I think it's important to say that the strategy itself is fairly simple and straightforward. And we'll come to that later. But first of all, I'll hand over to Elle to take you through some of those goals and the challenges. Thanks, Elle.
Thank you, Aista. Hello, everyone. I'm Eleanor Matty, and I'm the Access to Justice Policy and Research Officer at the Bevan Foundation. As Aista just mentioned, there are four key areas that need to be considered to develop the sector, and there are major challenges, many of which overlap, facing each of those areas. So I just want to point out that the lines on the diagram show the crossover of challenges into those other areas. Because of the very deep and lasting crisis, there are several challenges facing sector resilience that Welsh Government would need to address. Firstly, legal aid is disappearing, and this is alarming. Previous Ben Foundation research shows a drop of over 60% in immigration legal aid provider offices since September 2018. And as legal aid disappears, so does that central government funding for complex representation. And so the decline in legal aid has massively impacts sector resilience, especially in terms of the knock-on effect on organisations operating under the Immigration Advice Authority and who are being increasingly consumed by legal aid demand. Building sector resilience as a starting point is incredibly challenging when there's actually very little sector left to build upon. Both IAA and legal aid services are operating in crisis mode, and it's very difficult to then step outside of that crisis mode to be able to plan and reorganise services. And again, especially when there is a huge unmet need under both of those regulatory services. By consequence, building sector resilience is difficult when there is little to no capacity to train and develop staff. Qualified immigration advisors face high workloads and low salaries, and this can push people to leave the sector. And as the sector then continues to shrink, the remaining time, energy, and resources that could be used to develop staff is instead spent on firefighting. The need for immigration advice far outweighs provision. There is a severe shortage in qualified immigration advisors in Wales. And so to increase legal provision, we need an intake of new advisors into the sector. And one of the challenges in doing that is that there are not enough pathways from training into practice. Students studying in Welsh universities have very few training opportunities. There are only two schemes available in Wales for students to gain practical experience in immigration and asylum law, and those schemes are the Fresh Claims Project, delivered by Cardiff University in partnership with Asylum Justice and the Swansea University Law Clinic. And although these schemes are successful, they do not provide that structured pathway into practice. Many entry-level roles require IAA accreditation, but there are limited opportunities to become accredited before people make those applications. And of course, organisations don't always have the resources to train a graduate. And so these barriers nearly block entry into immigration law entirely. I mentioned on the last slide, limited capacity for training and development, and this is particularly relevant in the context of supervision. Senior practitioners need to meet the demands of complex casework, and so they have very little spare capacity to be able to supervise and support emerging providers or providers who want to go up in regulation. Some non-legal support charities spend hours chasing referrals, making appointments, finding legal representatives, and offering that invaluable support to people as they go through the immigration process. These organisations are often quite small, and they develop trust amongst migrant communities, but they are often unrecognised, poorly funded, and poorly supported. There is a need for better, more formal partnership working between the legal sector and support organisations, not only to free up capacity for advisors, but also to empower clients through the organisations that they already trust. While there are excellent immigration legal services in Wales, because of the shortage in provision and the urgency for services, people often seek advice across the UK. Sometimes this is online, and quite often it's in unregulated environments, which puts people at a huge risk of exploitation. Fundamental to empowering legal clients is people knowing their rights, but previous Bevan Foundation research shows that many of the people that we spoke to did not know that they had rights and did not understand them. And again, this increases the risk of exploitation and the ability to identify unregulated advisors. Empowering legal clients also applies within the regulated advice space. The same research shows that many of the people that we spoke to had not been given a client care letter by their legal representative. And this client care letter explains the right to complain about an advisor, which means that people cannot challenge poor practice. They aren't empowered to challenge poor practice and therefore enforce their rights. The reality of the crisis in immigration provision in Wales means that many people are being denied access to local immigration services simply because there aren't any. Having to travel long distances to meet legal representatives, whether that's to London, to Birmingham, or even within Wales, if you're outside of that kind of southeast region, chances are you don't have local immigration services, which affects empowerment and trust because the legal services aren't running alongside those supported the trusted support organisations, and people are then unable to talk to someone locally who has used that legal service. Last but certainly not least is quality. Improving quality is fundamental to developing the sector. Improving quality practice, client care, and service outcomes underpins the strategy, but there are many structural challenges in achieving this. Currently, there is an overwhelming failure demand in the sector. Failure demand is the additional demand on services because people have failed to receive or access a service in time, or they need additional help because of poor practice and mistakes. It results in cases becoming more complex in time-sensitive situations. And so as failure demand grows, so does the demand for complex casework, which current provision cannot meet. And this then increases waiting times again, which in turn this results in more failure demand. So this sort of catch 22 failure demand cycle runs all the way through the system and it reduces capacities. The more failure demand equals less service provision, and this significantly affects quality and the experiences of justice. Thank you, and I'll hand you back to Isita.
Thanks, Eleanor. So the strategy, what are we asking for? We're fundamentally asking the Welsh Government to fund the sector properly. Immigration advice is at the heart of social welfare. It affects rights, it affects people's health, and it impacts on homelessness, debt, poverty, a whole range of social welfare issues. But it doesn't receive its fair share of funding. And as an example, if you take the Single Advice Fund, that's the mechanism by which Welsh Government funds social welfare advice, there is no funding in that for regulated immigration advice. The sector has been underfunded and run down over years, and it will take investment to turn that around. And we're asking for that investment in 4 key areas. Sorry, next slide, please. Thanks. We're asking for that investment in 4 key areas. The first is a rolling programme of supervision and support, and that's to develop new services and also to help services to move up to higher levels of advice. The second is investment in non-legal services, closing the gaps between legal provision and representation and that migrant support. And that will involve funding both legal and non-legal services. The third area is empowerment of legal clients, giving people proper status as clients rather than grateful recipients of charity, and stopping that exploitation and that cycle of failure demand that Elle was talking about earlier. And finally, we believe it's really important for Welsh Government to invest in developing legal aid within the charity sector, stopping the decline of legal aid and helping to keep essential UK government funding in immigration advice in Wales. So that first area, supervision and support, we've had a working group of experts looking at this over the past few months, and they are recommending a programme with recruited accredited advisors. And that's supervisors, not advisors, that's supervisors who are accredited in both IAA, that's the Immigration Advice Authority, and IAAS, which is the Law Society accredited scheme that is necessary to hold a legal aid contract. If you're confused at all about the IAA and the IAAS, please do have a look at the report because there is a glossary in there which explains those different accreditation schemes. The recommendation is for a rolling 3 to 5 year programme for advisors that would train advisors to at least level 2 IAA and potentially to level 3. It would offer broad placement experience and train advisors to IAAS casework standards, which really is the gold standard of casework management. We believe that such a programme would increase expertise. It would create a network of support for advisors. It would ensure that trainees go into practice and would actually develop advisors within the sector. And it would train advisors to an independent level, and those advisors would go on to become tomorrow's supervisors. We're currently working on a costed briefing on this to support its implementation, and that will follow shortly. Secondly, we're asking for investment for support for non-legal services. As Elle was saying earlier, migrant support organisations offer hours of essential work that complements legal services. And that covers things like making appointments for people with legal providers, chasing referrals, helping people to complete documents that don't require regulated advice, preparing people for appointments with their legal representatives, and helping people to understand the documents and the decisions that they receive. And they provide ongoing trauma-informed support. We believe that more formal, structured partnerships and accompanied training would make this work more effective, would increase capacity and free up capacity of legal advisors, and would improve people's legal outcomes. Empowering legal clients is essential for improving quality. And protecting children is paramount to this, and that's why we're recommending an independent guardianship scheme for all unaccompanied children in Wales. This is something that the United Nations Commission on the Rights of the Child has been calling for over 20 years, and it still has not been implemented in the UK, apart from in Scotland, where there is an exemplary scheme which trains guardians to level 2 IAA. That is proven to improve the legal outcomes of children, and we believe that a similar scheme should be implemented here in Wales. We've been doing quite a lot of work on this with the Children's Legal Centre Wales and the Children's Society, and you can find briefings on that on our website as well. Our Experts by Experience group have made some clear recommendations for trauma-informed information sharing and rights sharing, and we believe that that will help people to recognise good practice. It will help people to challenge bad practice, and we believe that more Welsh Government investment needs to be put into doing that and supporting people to do that. And it will help people to avoid those poor choices that people are pressured to make while they're waiting for immigration advice and they can't find it. And it will also help to tackle that exploitation and that cycle of failure demand. Finally, and this is a fairly long-term aim, we believe that Welsh Government really needs to invest time, energy and money in developing legal aid within the charity sector. There's a real lack of viability of legal aid in the private sector, and firms have been pulling out over the recent years quite steadily. That does need to be tackled, and the UK government needs to take action on that. But we can't wait for UK government to act. We need to act to ensure secure legal aid in Wales, and encouraging more charities to take up legal aid contracts is important in that. The diversity of income that's in the charity sector helps to make legal aid more viable, but make no mistake, there are very real challenges, and Welsh Government needs to work with charities to identify what these are and to help them to overcome them. There are real benefits to legal aid contracts. It provides a framework of training, accreditation and funding, which supports complex and high-level casework. It brings in essential UK government funding to the immigration advice sector. And through disbursements, it helps to meet some of those costs of higher level and more complex advice, things like experts' reports, health reports, interpreters, etc. But we need to support charities to take up legal aid contracts, and charities also need protecting, particularly from some of that aggressive auditing that the legal aid agency is known for. And we need to ensure that charities can hold legal aid contracts with confidence. Next slide, thank you. So to sum up, immigration advice is badly underfunded, and our call is for focused strategic investment. We believe that's investment that will reap huge rewards. Not getting immigration advice and not getting immigration advice in a timely manner can affect people's status. It drives homelessness, deep poverty, debt, exploitation and ill health, and all of this is evidenced in our research. those issues can affect people long after settlement and long after citizenship even. And it affects people from racialized communities over and above others. We cannot have equality and prosperity in Wales without access to immigration justice. And that's why we're asking the next Welsh Government to act swiftly and to provide investment and funding where it's most needed and in a strategic and informed way. Thank you.
Thank you, Isita, and thank you, Elle. I think everyone will agree that's a really powerful presentation, and the report is certainly worth a read. I think to get more detail that goes alongside that. If people, just a reminder to pop some questions into the Q&A box. I can see some questions popping up there already, which is great. I thought I'd just maybe ask, and I think you've hinted at this throughout your presentation, Isita, but to ask the devil's advocate question, I guess that someone listening to this might say is, well, justice isn't devolved, legal aid isn't devolved. Why should the Welsh government be stepping into this space? I think you've provided hints on what your answer to that would be, but how would you respond to that, especially at a time of an election kind of on the horizon as well?
Okay, so I'd say, as we said in the presentation, immigration advice affects social welfare and social justice, and which is very much within the remit of Welsh Government. Immigration law and policy is reserved, but the immigration advice isn't. And also, Welsh Government has a precedence of stepping in to support where legal aid has been cut, for example, in social welfare. Social welfare advice is funded. There's no reason why immigration advice shouldn't be funded as well.
Absolutely. And of course, even from a self-interest perspective, the challenges you said about the long-term impact of poverty, etc., that adds pressure onto Welsh Government services in other areas as well. So I think, yeah, absolutely, a really
Absolutely does, yeah. It has a huge
powerful
knock-on effect.
case. We've got some questions already coming in, so I'll try and bash. I've got a few from John Donkersley. So I think one of them came in, and I think you came on to touch on this, but there was a question about the focus on law students and about the IAA regulated organisations being another space where growth could happen. I think you covered that, but you might just want to reflect on that about why the initial focus on students. And then there was another question then, which I'll read out to make sure I get the technicalities correct. So you need to have any trainee immigration advisors in an organisation that is currently regulated. So how would that work around a network of supervisors? They'd need to find workplaces that was regulated for them to be placed within as well. So kind of yeah, looking beyond students and then that network idea working within the constraints of the system, perhaps.
The strategy doesn't purely focus on students. It definitely includes people who are already working within regulated services or people within support services who might be looking to become accredited. Um, the focus on students within this webinar is in terms of the lack of pathways from training into practice. And although, again, the strategy doesn't just focus on students, in terms of entry into legal aid, not legal aid, sorry, immigration law and immigration advice and practice, we're kind of cutting off a good resource of capacity with the students if there's the interest there and the willingness to join the sector. They also need those pathways to be able to join the sector, and those pathways, once developed, shouldn't just apply to students. Where there's supervision and support in place, those pathways need to kind of include those legal aid services, the services that are already regulated, so that people who are working in support sectors who are already accredited and want to go up in regulation can also do that through those pathways that have been developed.
Yeah, and I think I'd add to that as well to say um, law students are an obvious source of legal advisors. But also there are, as I was saying, there are already a couple of training schemes in Wales, and which do involve law students. And so we wanted to make sure that we recognise that, and we talk about their pathways. But actually, in our report, we do say that it's very important to look in the migration support sector, for example, for potential legal advisors. A guardianship scheme would help to train people. So the broader the pool of expertise and interest in immigration advice, the better. And it's good to have advisors from a range of different backgrounds. We need more advisors and people in leadership roles with lived experience, for example. We need people who understand the challenges that people face when they migrate and when they go through the asylum system as well.
Thanks. I guess for the second part of the question, actually, that links to Reese Hughes Evans has asked the question as well, linked to that about he's also interested in the supervision and support idea, and I wants to hear a bit more about how you envisage that working practically. So I think that links possibly neatly with the second part of the question from John.
Okay, I'm trying to remember, sorry, what John's question was.
It was around kind of the kind of in terms of the supervision element about would the people in receipt of that supervision need to be within
That's right.
the kind of the regulated
Yeah, there's
workspace.
about accreditation, wasn't it?
Yeah,
So there are lots of things that can be done in terms of kind of borrowing accreditation. So this scheme involved actually recruiting. The recommendation from the experts group is about recruiting advisors who would actually hold accreditation, and that accreditation could then be used for to cover the people that they supervise. So we're trying to get across that initial situation where you don't have accreditation, you've got to become accredited, and you've somehow got to get an advisor up and train them, and then that creates that big delay at the beginning. So there is more detail coming, and we are producing a briefing to explain that. But generally, the idea is that accreditation can be used across organisations. That Welsh Government would establish a programme that would kind of hold its own accreditation and help to use that to um, extend that supervision to other organisations and to move that along. Devon and Cornwall support services support Devon and Cornwall refugee support have done quite a lot of work on that, and they were involved in the experts group as well, in terms of kind of in assisting other organisations to develop advisors, etc. And we'd like to look at whether we could set up a similar scheme in Wales.
fab. We're getting lots of questions in, which is obviously really good and makes my life simultaneously easier and harder. So apologies if we don't get through all of them, but please keep them coming through. There's a question here from an anonymous attendee, slightly different note, around the legal aid contract and about, well, there's two questions actually on legal aid. One is that the scope of legal aid focuses on asylum and domestic abuse cases, but obviously there's demand outside of that. So there was a point made about, kind of the need for support outside what's within scope of legal aid. And then there was another question then for an anonymous attendee around, is there the desire, you think, within the voluntary sector to take on more legal aid contracts?
Okay, so do you mind if I take that first one out? Yeah, so with legal aid, yes, legal aid is limited. So it's limited essentially to asylum and human rights cases, domestic abuse cases. But there is a massive underused safety net in inverted commas of exceptional case funding. It's virtually not available in Wales. People just don't offer it because it's not financially viable. But that exceptional case funding is supposed to be there for people who aren't within scope of legal aid, but who face the risk of having their human rights breached if they don't access legal aid. So we really need to find a way that that is actually able to be offered to people. But also, this isn't just about providing services within legal aid, it's about providing services under our IAA accreditation as well, because you're absolutely right, it's essential that people outside of the scope of legal aid get services. And one of the things that we found during the project as well is that the services that have been set up to serve those people are actually increasingly increasingly needed to offer services to very vulnerable people who can't get legal aid. And so we're losing what little provision we have outside of the scope of legal aid. And it's absolutely essential that Welsh Government step in and they bolster those services, and we develop new services and in new areas as well.
Fab. And
And
maybe,
as
Elle, if pick with you about the voluntary sector, is the demand there, or you, Isita? Yeah, would they be up for it?
there are huge challenges, like I say, and I think some voluntary sector organisations would not. I think there is a potential to look at new services who may be more willing to take that up from scratch. But we have to start. Like I said when I introduced it, it is a long-term goal. I don't think there are charities which are queuing up to take legal aid contracts at the moment, and that's partly because the administration of legal aid is quite cumbersome. There are a lot of things that you have to put in place to make sure that you can manage a legal aid contract properly and well, and safely for yourself. But we believe that there's real need to have a look at that in Wales and to actually see, okay, what are the problems? What can we offer charities to support them? Can things be put in place, for example, to handle that billing centrally, or could we put in place mechanisms to make sure that we take off some of the load off charities, and start there. So we're not saying no, there's this organisation all lined up and wanting to take on a legal aid service. We're saying it's an area which really needs development and which Welsh Government needs to look at and help support charities to put in place.
Yeah, I just want to second that because it's not so much as desire in terms of the wording, but if the mechanisms are in place, the support are in place, and the challenges are already laid out, and organisations know perhaps in advance of doing something what to expect, what support they can receive in taking up a legal aid contract, and how perhaps other organisations can help in that support. Perhaps desire, quote unquote, desire will, come as that's developed, but as I just said, it's something that needs to be looked into as a kind of alternative source to generate capacity and meet the need for immigration advice.
And
That, sorry,
oh,
you go
sorry, I was
ahead.
just going to say, and actually having Welsh Government championing that the need for change in legal aid would be really vital, and that goes alongside that because the way it's administered at the moment and the way it's funded is undermining the whole legal aid system in immigration.
Thanks. Kind of building on that, kind of, I guess, one type of organization would be Citizens Advice, and Mike Morgan can make the point that he thinks that Citizens Advice are an organization that are regulated by IAA. Um, I know that you've been in contact with Citizens Advice, so did you just want to reflect quickly a little bit on that and your experiences of talking with Citizens Advice?
Yeah, so I think citizens' advice is really important. At the moment, they're not particularly funded for immigration advice, certainly not through the SAF. That's a single advice fund, sorry, using lingo. The and most citizens' advice services, in fact, all of them bar one in Wales, only operate at level one, and level one is the very most basic form of immigration advice. It's not an ongoing casework service. Newport Citizens Advice have recently gone up to level two, and I think there's a lot of enthusiasm there, and a lot of they've certainly learned a lot, and they're willing to share that and kind of spearhead that work. And so I think there's a huge amount that could be done in making sure that in helping more citizens advice bureaus to go up to level two, and really kind of linking that with other services as well outside of citizens advice. So it's making sure that this crucial source of advice that we've got is serving people with immigration legal needs as well as people with other social welfare needs.
And kind of another, I guess, leg of the stool to kind of mix metaphors. Obviously, is local government, and Matt Miller's asked about whether you think there's a role for local authorities to offer immigration advice, either from within their legal departments or by support other advice services such as homelessness advice.
With legal, I think there's a huge block with local authorities in offering immigration advice. There's I know Newport have an in-house immigration advice service, but there are problems in terms of conflict of interest around clients, for example. So an immigration advisor, they're first and foremost, their interest has to lie with the client and not with the local authority. So there can be conflicts that arise there. I think there's definitely a role for local authorities to fund immigration advice, and it definitely lies within their sphere of duty to do so. And that's something as well that when we come on to our costed briefings, we will draw more attention to. Dr. Joe Wilding has written a very interesting and useful report about called It's a No-Brainer, which is about local authority funding of immigration advice and why it's needed, and how it could be grown.
Fab. Anything on that?
Yeah, I'm echoing again what Eista has just said, but um, I think local authorities definitely do have a role in the provision of immigration advice, particularly because of the benefit that would come with local authorities providing that immigration advice, not necessarily in-house, like Eista said, um, directly funding immigration advice. And developing those relationships with the legal sector and those support organisations. And you can kind of see this where you have unaccompanied asylum seeking children. And again, the guardianship scheme would help with providing that immigration advice to those children once they well approaching 18. But at the moment, referrals tend to go down to asylum justice from across Wales. And so I think local authorities, I think, could actually, through funding immigration advice, could take a lot of pressure off the sector.
Great. Thanks, Al. There's a question here from an anonymous attendee that maybe links to, gives you a chance maybe to kind of say about some of the stuff that you're going to be working on next, which is around that the Welsh Government is providing some funding for immigration advice and asking about how does the strategy fit in with what is already being provided in terms of are you calling for additional money for the money that's being spent to be spent better or both? So yeah, take that as you want and kind of maybe reflect on maybe some of the next things you're doing as well.
Uh, that's an easy answer is both. And we do acknowledge that Welsh Government has funded immigration advice. It's also funded some very useful sort of training schemes and development support for the sector, which is much needed. I think we're saying that it needs to be more strategically thought about. And so what we're talking about is actually looking at funding supervision and support as a whole in a whole program which is embedded in the migration sector, funding non-legal support as a program which is embedded in the migration sector. And I think one of the problems with the funding at the moment is it's individual organizations or schemes or projects which are being funded, and because the sector is in such a dire state, we really need to think about how those things link together, and how we can maximize the benefit of that funding. Also, we need a lot more funding. If you compare immigration advice funding to other social justice causes, it's really, really funded much, much less. And it isn't there in the mainstream funding, so in the single advice fund. It's just not there. It's funded on the edges, and that makes it quite vulnerable because those things can be picked off quite easily. And I think it needs to be really built into mainstream funding and be seen as a vital central fund alongside all the other social welfare funding.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things we've been talking about as well is an to that funds that would seem relatively insignificant to other sectors would be really, really quite significant for the migration space, given the starting point. So, in terms of making that case to Welsh government, we're not asking for £100 million or whatever it is here, that would obviously be nice. We are smoking smallest sums that would make a considerable change to the effectiveness of provision as well.
Absolutely. If you look at the Nation of Sanctuary budget, tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of that has gone on immigration advice, um, across the different migrant groups. So it's really important that we actually think about the importance and the value of immigration advice to us as a nation and to society. And this isn't just about some people over there who don't belong to us. This is about people living in Wales who are settling in Wales, who are going to go on to live their lives in Wales and have children who are growing up in Wales. So we need to start valuing the sector really and the advice that it gives.
That possibly takes us then to a good question to finish off on, which is nation and sanctuary is one of those terms we've heard a lot of in the line up to the Senedd election in terms of that political context is quite challenging, possibly around this, but not just that. we're seeing the UK government making some policy changes that are also kind of creating a more difficult landscape for migrants. So this anonymous attendee has asked, given all of that, how can the next administration to be encouraged to take this forward, this strategy forward, rather than kind of, yeah, maybe something that sits on the shelf somewhere, oh, that's really important, but they actually get on and doing some other stuff. So yeah, kind of chance for some final thoughts on what I know is quite a big question.
I
So the
think,
question is,
oh,
I'll go,
sorry.
L, you take this one.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in the context of the UK government and the hostile environment, and how we can encourage the next Welsh government to take up the strategy in Wales, I think we need to, if we run out of immigration legal services, um, that's fundamentally violating human rights. I think there needs to be a rights approach and argument to providing justice, which, I mean, that it's already a rights approach, if you're trying to provide justice, but um, just because the hostile environment is kind of being echoed, by the UK government, and that's trickling through to the justice system. That doesn't mean to say that the argument should change, that people still require justice irrespective of immigration status. And if we run out of immigration legal services, which in terms of legal aid, there are four providers left, spread over five offices, with a 60% decline in offices since 2018. It would be far-fetched to say that what happens when legal aid actually disappears from Wales, then the next Welsh government will actually have to do something. So it's at the point where you can't really argue with the fact that something needs to be done to ensure people can access justice. And I think holding that line is kind of the approach that is going to need to be taken.
Then this is about the next Welsh government. Are we are is there an interest in rights? Do we want a fair Wales and a just Wales? Do we want people to have access to justice? Do we want an economy that functions? Do we want a place where a society that's cohesive and where people can belong? So those are the questions, really. I can't answer those on behalf of the next Welsh government, but we will do our best to push forward the strategy and to make those arguments and to persuade the next Welsh government to do what is needs to be done.
Yeah, thank you both. And I think what struck me that's quite powerful about the report as well is that, and I think we probably need to see more of this collectively in this space, is that we're unapologetic in what we're asking for in this. I think there's been a tendency maybe to kind of go really, really sorry, but can we have some crumbs off the table in terms of, what we're talking about here is no, this needs to be done. This is the right thing to do. And if we're serious about it, this is the sort of action that we'd like to see. And maybe, there is a case for us all maybe to be making the case much more strongly in terms of that this is the right thing to be looking at and the right thing to be doing as well. So yeah, thank you very much both. I think it's been a really really interesting session. Thank you for everyone who's joined and how many of you have stayed till the end. That's absolutely fantastic. Sorry if we didn't get to your question. It's just that time has got the better of us. But I'm sure Elle and Isotope would welcome any kind of follow-up conversations because I know our work in this space is going to be carrying on going as well. Otherwise, that's all I've got to do is say diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much for all of you for coming along, and we'll see you again soon.